A Bit Lit, celebrating creativity and research of all kinds. Lauren, Ollie, absolutely brilliant to have you here. Thank you for joining us. A Bit Lit is a project that was set up in response to COVID to celebrate research and creativity, literature and practice of all kinds. And we've spoken to professional practitioners, we've spoken to creative writers, we've spoken to researchers, but we've never yet actually spoken to students who are at the crucial end of the process of studying and responding to literature and creative writing, and indeed creating kinds of criticism in your essays and creative writing in your own right. So thank you so much for joining us. You're both students at the University of Roehampton, which is where I and A Bit Lit are based, and we're absolutely delighted to hear from you. Lauren, would you start us off just by introducing yourself, please?
Great. So I'm Lauren. I've just finished my third year studying creative writing at Roehampton.
Thank you. And Ollie?
So I'm Ollie. I have just finished my second year studying English literature at Roehampton, so I'm about to enter my third.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I suppose I'd like to start just by hearing about the kinds of studying you've been doing, the kinds of reading you've been doing, and indeed the kinds of writing that you've been doing. Again, perhaps maybe if we start with Lauren, would you just talk us through what your experience has been like studying a degree in the last 3 years?
Yeah, so I've sort of just finished going through the whole process of the creative writing degree. And what I've really enjoyed is how you look at a really wide range of modules in the first year, and then as you go through the degree, you can pick modules which you're more interested in or you want to know more about. For me, that's been more the fiction side. So I'm looking at short stories and narrative, and then in the third year, going into novel writing. And something which I found really useful is looking at the shorter form and being able to sort of perfect the elements of narrative and the story in the shorter form has really helped me when I go to the long form and the novel. Sort of following that through has been great.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. Ollie, likewise, would you tell us about just finished your second year, right? So would you tell us about the last 2 years?
So my first year with English literature, a lot of it is to kind of get everyone up to the same point. So we focus on a very wide expanse of different books. So it might be from Beowulf, the first original text, through to an author like Zadie Smith in modern fiction. So the first year was very much get to grips with all different types of text, see what works for you. And then this year, in my second year, I've specialised in my course a little more. So for me, that's meant going down more history. So for example, I've done some study with Victorian literature, history and context. So looking at how history has affected literature throughout different ages and how like novels, texts, poems have changed. So that's been really interesting. And then in my third year, I'm going to take that even further and kind of have a look at how history affects the individual, how it affects text. I'm a bit of a history nerd, but still doing it with a literature focus.
Yeah, brilliant. That's fantastic. Thank you. I've got a few follow-up questions for Ollie there. The first one is, you talked about specialization and how, the first year is an introduction and kind of wide introduction to different kinds of literature, and then you get to specialize. That must mean that you're studying alongside students who are specializing in quite different things. So does that mean that you end up having kind of conversations with people who now think about literature from really different viewpoints because of that specialization?
100%, yeah. Because I'm more history-based, I bring a historicism approach to my work. So looking at, the impact of history on an author and their text. Whereas other people in my year this year have gone more for gender in text and studying women or religion and looking at the differences within different texts for that. So they've brought that perspective to the table. And it's been really interesting. And if we're all in one module, to then get different perspectives from different specialisms, you end up coming away from them with more ideas than you started with, and it actually ends up affecting your own work as well, and for a benefit. There's been many a time where I've had a feminist critique in my historicism work and then had to kind of remind myself where I lie.
Great, thank you. And then the other question, I'm aware that you've also been working recently, amazingly given our own current historical circumstances, that you've been working as a director. Do you mind telling us a little bit about that and about how that relates to your studies, if at all?
Yeah, so I'm part of a society on campus, which is a drama society called the Roehampton Players. And amazingly enough, this year I've managed to direct and put on my own show with them. And yeah, it's been a long process. We started the show in November when things were kind of looking up a bit more with COVID, but only managed to put it on at the very start of June. So it was long-winded, but having the experience from the English degree, in a very weird way, it really helped me to direct and to put on the show. So the kind of research and analysis that I was doing in my essays, I managed to take into the script and looking into, what does this mean in the script? What should this character be doing? Why is this character doing that? What is this character's potential history? I managed to take that forward, and as a result, it allowed me to create a much more in-depth show to a lot of good feedback as well. So personally, I think it was very beneficial. It's not something you'd think that it would potentially affect, history in literature to then doing a show, like directing a theatre show. But weirdly enough, yes, it's been very positive and quite a big impact on the work there.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. I mean, part of the mission statement of A Bit Lit, and also just of my own work, is to move between historical and critical and creative and performance practice. I'm always fascinated to hear about that. And yeah. Lauren, you too are pointing us in that direction. And you talked about studying fiction and moving from short stories, thinking about narrative, and then up to novels, and about, thinking about form at the level of something very small to something massive like a novel. I mean, those questions, those are obviously creative questions, and they could be thought about historically. So I'm kind of interested to know whether that is something that is a part of the way you think about those processes, or if the form is a much more kind of live contemporary issue, an issue that is here right now. How do you feel about those questions?
I think that probably quite contrasting to Ollie. I'm definitely more interested in some of the more contemporary stuff that's going on. I haven't quite gone fully innovative in terms of the short form, but I'm quite interested in flash fiction. And as part of our degree, I moved from the doing a narrative module, and then from there did an advanced narrative module, which is really turning all of the basics that we learned in the first novel on its head, learning crazy sort of techniques about tail twist stories, or stories that just have little tension or little characters completely. So sort of throwing everything you thought you knew about a story out the window, which has been really interesting and something which I like about more contemporary fiction.
Yeah, that's great. That's really fascinating. And I don't know how Ollie feels, but in a way, I'm not sure if those two things are necessarily in tension, in that, we are ourselves historical beings. We are living through history. We're living through quite a specific phase in history at the moment. And I'm mindful of the fact that if Ollie is just finishing second year, that most of your degree will have happened during COVID. And likewise for Lauren, I presume half of that degree. So there's a kind of example of something which feels historical in the sense of changing how humans live forever, and yet it's also contemporary. It's with us right now, and we're speaking through a medium, which was, the reason we can't speak in a room together is because of COVID. Would you mind telling us a bit about what it's been like to study during COVID? Maybe Ollie, if we start with you.
Yeah. So as mentioned, the majority of my degree has been under COVID. I probably got half of my first year in normal circumstances, and then my end of my first year and the whole of my second year has been remote teaching. It's been weird, definitely a bit alien in some sense. Obviously, there's a lot of the social aspects that you are missing out on. I think in terms of study perspective, there's been positives, there have also been negatives. Obviously, with literature, discussion is a large part of it. So as a negative, it's a little bit difficult when you're on a computer, when you're on Zoom, to get the same kind of discussions that you would get in a room full of people. We always joke that it's like a book club in normal circumstances. But at the same time, Zoom has also allowed it to be a bit easier in terms of how lectures are delivered as well. So, I'm now able to have several books on my desk and cross-reference them, whereas in a lecture theatre or in a classroom, you're having to change the books over all the time. So that has been a positive, actually. But I'm now in a larger space. I'm in, a room that I'm in the majority of the time. Personally as well, I'm a DSA student. So last year, when we were in normal circumstances, there were a few instances where I couldn't go to class because of that. So Zoom has allowed me to still attend my lectures, even on the days where I'm not feeling too good. So personally, it has had a positive impact on my studies. There has just been this really weird university shift where the study is the main focus and there's not much else after that. I'm hoping it gets better in third year, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And just to think through, it's fascinating hearing that lectures have become something that Zoom has almost improved what it's like to experience lecture. Is that partly just about ownership of the material, that if you want to, you can just press pause, you can go back, you can come back to it when you want to, you can control the ambient noise around you perhaps a bit better than you can if you're amongst a room full of other people? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, definitely. What it mainly is for me is I'm a really big note taker. So I like to take a lot of my notes of the lectures, what the lecturer is saying, as well as the slides. So having the remote lectures has allowed me to pause the slide, think about it, maybe do some research of my own in between the lecture slides. It's allowed me to personally have more of a relation to what is being talked about instead of just sitting passively and trying to rush my notes. So that has been really beneficial on a personal standpoint. I do know other people though who prefer the in-person lectures just because if they're having that one-to-one, that's a lot easier for them. But just personally, I like to pause and do my own research within the lecture.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you. Lauren, how about you?
Yeah, I've definitely felt a similar thing with that. There's been a few benefits as well as the negatives of online learning. That sort of the discussion and the sort of atmosphere in a room, you can't quite replicate that. But definitely in some of the workshopping I've done during my novel writing module, being able to send a document out on email, everyone read the same document and then come to the room on Zoom and discuss about it, take it in turns to feedback. Actually having it more structured has been really helpful in making sure that I get all of the feedback and everyone gets the chance to feedback. Has been really helpful. And I'm quite lucky in the fact that I had my first year and the beginning of my second year was in person. So that has sort of allowed me to have experiences that I might not necessarily have now. There's a number of trips and in-person classes, going out into London, that sort of thing that unfortunately we can't do now, but I am very grateful that I had that opportunity.
Oh, well, I felt you tantalized us there, so I feel like we should hear a bit more about that. I mean, it's one thing I really value about, one of the things I love about teaching at Roehampton is that we do get to go out into London. There's been fantastic work from some of my colleagues taking students to Paris. So Lauren, I know you said we can't do it now, so we're going to tantalize people even more, really, if you give us more info. Tell us a bit about what that was like.
So yeah, the Paris trip was what happened in my second year, and at the time the module was called Beyond London. So it was about going to a place and how being in that place and on that location influenced your writing, and how the history of the place and the history of the other writing that's happened in that place has affected your writing. So we spent a week in Paris, which was amazing, just the writer's dream, really, visiting all these amazing landmarks and historic places, the Sacre-Cœur, the Eiffel Tower, Shakespeare and Company bookshop, which is just amazing, and having a chance to do a number of like writing prompts and activities around those locations, and think about how that was really influencing your own writing. For the creative writing students, we had to create a 500-word sort of portfolio of our experience in a longer either fiction or poetry piece in response to that, which is, you know, really great, as it's such a creative assignment and so specific to you personally. I wrote a lot about my own feelings of being in Paris as my first time there, and sort of things that I was going through personally that had happened, and how being there and being me there affected my writing, which it was just such a great experience. I really hope that students get to do it again in the future. Absolutely.
Yes, I mean, I think I can say on behalf of the department that we're very keen to be doing that in the future as soon as circumstances allow. And Lauren, you put it brilliantly there. Being there and being me there is a fantastic way of putting it. And it's a really good summary also of all the things that have been taken away from us in the last couple of years. And I'm really inspired to hear from both of you about, you know, the good things you've taken from that situation, the positives you found in it. That is really incredibly inspiring. And we also think about London as well in our teaching. So we go out into London and we not only kind of read particular books in the context of the actual places where they were either produced or they're set. So, for example, we take students on the Mrs. Dalloway walk. We do the kind of walk that Virginia Woolf gets the reader to think about in the first few pages of that novel. We go on that walk. And then speaking as a teacher, one of the most wonderful things about that then is students report back on what they saw. And of course, I can't teach that. They were being there, being them, to quote Lauren. And I will never be there and be them. So it's a really lovely example of some of the creative work that students then report back to us and get us to change the way we think about those streets and that novel, that kind of thing. Do either of you want to add anything about studying in London, either on modules which think about London or just in general? Do either of you have any thoughts about that?
I was just thinking that links back to what Ollie was saying about how you can be on the same course but get such different experiences studying different specific things. No one is going to have the same feedback from that walk. You're all going to notice different things, and it's just sort of an extension of that. You're on the same course, you're learning the same techniques, but it's very different. But as for writing in London, we did a similar module where we derived around London from St Paul's, looking at those texts. But also we've been out into the campus as well. So there's a module called Thinking Like a Writer I did in my first year, where we went and sat out on the lawn on campus, on Frober Lawn, and really just sort of focused on the senses and used sort of a writer's toolkit, if you like, so a series of prompts, writing in place, using your senses to create a piece. And that's just like, you know, just a really immersive way of writing. It's great.
Yeah, that's lovely. I first arrived at Roehampton in 2013, and my very first conversation with students was about the campus and about the kind of sensory experience of being on campus. It's a fantastically beautiful campus, but also contains the most random array of things and objects and animals. Yeah, geese. I mean, I spoke about geese before I spoke about books with my students because the campus, it is important. They need to be acknowledged. Ollie, have you got any thoughts about London or the campus and literature?
I think for me, I find it very interesting at kind of the diversity of the course, especially because there are people coming from all different walks of life. Like myself, I'm like from near Sheffield, and I'm quite used to like country lanes, a lot of fields, farms, stuff like that. So in terms of coming to the campus, the green of the campus allowed me to adjust to London a bit more, which was really nice, and it felt very homely. But at the same time, like walking through London and doing the courses which are London focused, you get the people who have grown up in London, who are seeing it more as like their home and approach it from that perspective. And then from a personal one, I'm a little bit more of a tourist. So I'm coming in not having seen these things before. And that was very interesting to get people's different perspectives and how they were viewing the same thing. Yeah, I remember specifically thinking that in my first year, there was me and another girl who was from Newcastle, and we had very similar opinions about London and kind of what it looked like, and it was very different to perhaps the people on our module who were from London. Yeah, that was a little weird, but it was nice as well. It really shows the differences just from where you're from and where you end up.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Yeah, it is a very, I mean, I'm thinking again about my own experiences as a student and how different, you were talking about individuals and diversity and how, you know, the particular university you study at and the department you study at affects the way you read literature. And yeah, Roehampton as a university and Roehampton as a location are both such kind of distinctive places, and then to be so close to places like Wimbledon Common, Putney, to the river. I really love being so close to the river, given how important the river itself has been to not just literature, but to the history of the city. It really does change in colour and situate how you read, how you write. So that's completely fascinating. And I love the fact you've both stressed the importance of individuals and diversity to the courses, because I think that is so important, that we have a fantastically diverse student body. We try and offer them a diverse range of kinds of literature, and then to think about literature from the perspective of inclusion, diversity. Ollie, you were talking earlier about history and gender, but also thinking, of course, that gender has a history and what happens when we start to think about the history of those various kinds of identities. That's really fascinating. Something else which feels distinctive about Roehampton and studying there is Fincham Press. So Fincham Press, for those new to it, is a university press conceived, commissioned, edited and published by people at Roehampton, and bringing students as well as staff into the world of publishing. Was that an important part of either your studies or even the choice to come to Roehampton?
Definitely for me, it was a key part of what I wanted from Roehampton. To have the press associated with the university was sort of like a goal for me when I came to Roehampton. I was like, this is something that I can really work on and try and do for myself. And I think that, you know, the tutors, they all support you through that. So one of the things I did when I started getting involved with the Fincham Press was take a piece that I'd already submitted for assessment. I took it back to tutorial and really sort of worked it even further, trying to push it as far as I could far as I could get, and it paid off, because I was published in the most recent anthology, which is called All That Glitters, and it was just really great to experience the publishing process before you even leave university. So even the process of getting your document back with red edits on, because it always happens, even if you do all your tutorials and everything, there's always going to be like little tweaks. So that was great. And then the act of signing the publishing agreement felt like a huge deal. Never done anything like that before. And understanding, you know, how long you have to wait before you share it elsewhere, whether or not, you know, the rights are still yours, all of those sorts of things, which you don't necessarily think about when you're just looking at the text and thinking, how good can this be? So that was brilliant. And what I found with Fincham Press too was I was asked by the editor at the time, Leonie Ross, what the intention was of the piece. So what was I really trying to get across? And that was just for the editor, so that we were on the same page, and when they were editing it, they knew what I was trying to do, and that's something that I haven't experienced at other publishing places. So the whole thing was just a great experience, really.
Oh, that's fantastic to hear. For those watching who'd like to learn more, we'll put a link below the film on our webpage to the Fincham Press, and particularly to All That Glitters. I don't want to speak for Ollie, but I'm sure both of us are honoured to be in the company of one of the people that glitter.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I think we're moving towards the end of the film now, and I guess I'd like to ask a question which just invites you to reflect back on why you chose to do English literature and creative writing, and how it has felt to do it. So I guess the question is what you value about the degree, what it's brought to you, and maybe what you've brought to it as well, because I really hope that our degree does change around what students are looking for. You know, you've spoken about the importance of the individual and diversity within what you study. But yeah, what do you value about the degree? Why English literature? Why creative writing? Ollie, please.
For me personally, I love stories. I love the personalization that you can get through different stories, and I love how relative it is to the individual. So you've got the author, the reader, you've got the characters in the text, which are their own people in their own right. I find that really fascinating, how personal a text can be. But at the same time, like, I always say that literature is life, and it sounds really cliche and really cheesy, but I really believe it to be true, because literature is so reflective of what is going on at any specific time. That you can read a book and trace it back to its history, whether or not that's the author, the characters, or the readership. You can really get a good perspective about what is going on, life, whether it's life that has happened, life that is happening, or life that will happen. You can get a really good perspective of that through literature. And yeah, that's really been the most interesting part for me, and why I wanted to go into it. It really aids me in pursuing theatre as well, to understand stories and life, and how that can then potentially one day translate to stage. I think this is me trying to develop my understanding of that.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you. Lauren.
Yeah, so for me, that the degree has sort of, as much as it's been about writing and the content, it's been about a lot more for me too. Like, just being in an environment where you're with other writers and other people who are interested in literature, and you're all taking each other seriously, you're all being critical of each other's work, you want to be better, and you want to help other people be better. And I feel like that has been the main thing I've got from the degree. It's sort of gone from me writing my stuff and friends and family going, oh yeah, that's really nice, to me taking myself more seriously and having other people take me seriously. It's just meant a lot, and it's done great things for my confidence too. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant to hear. Yeah, it feels so important to say that what you've both said about literature, studying it, and creative writing is so inspiring, so exciting. And that notion of taking each other seriously, helping people be better, loving stories, and the idea that literature is life. I don't think that's cheesy, Ollie. I think that sounds fantastic. And then thinking about how you might transfer that to the world of theatre. And one of the things I love about literature is the way it opens up so many different kinds of, not just careers, but just kind of lives after the degree. It's constantly opening up the world to you and inviting you to think about it differently. So that idea that literature is life and literature is responding to life, literature can also open up new kinds of lives beyond it by helping us to imagine differently, think differently. And that notion that both of you raised of just being critical, which always sounds so negative, I think, before you get your head around that idea. But I always talk about it being kind of optimistic skepticism, that you're putting things to doubt in order to find if there's a way of making it better. That makes me really excited when it comes to any kinds of humanities study. So thank you both. We end by asking what the word literature means to you. And Ollie's already told us that literature is life, but are there other ways of thinking about what literature is, just to help us wrap up? Lauren, if we start with you, please.
I think I would say that literature is people almost. I think that for me, it doesn't necessarily matter what the story is about. If you write a character, if you write a person that I love and I'm on board with, then I can read anything if it's written well enough. And I think that people really make it, because that's what I read to sort of discover, to sort of, like Ollie said, to enter all those different lives, to learn, to sort of understand people a bit better. And that's really what I enjoy writing and what I enjoy reading.
I love the idea of literature as people. I'm currently part of a research project on bears, believe it or not, the animals, not the kind of gay man. And it's kind of fascinating thinking about, as a person who thinks about literature, it's really humbling to be working with a group of animals who really do not care about literature, do not produce it, do not read it. So I love the idea of a literature as people. That's fascinating. Ollie, what is literature?
I think literature is a record of who we are and potentially who we're going to be. So, when you read a book, you're different at the beginning to who you are at the end of it, and you take on the perspective of that book. And similarly, when you are writing a book as well, it becomes a record of who you are in the moment when you're writing. So to me, that's what it is. It's a record of life. And I think that's a really magical thing, because then we're essentially escaping into a life that we already have, but it's just a different perspective and a different version of it. It's literally like parallel dimensions in some weird way. But yeah, I just find it all very fascinating. And to me, it's a record, really.
Yeah, a record, and then you're also telling us something which changes us. So it's sort of recording something, but in the act of recording it, changing it. So I love that, the complexity of that idea. Lauren, Ollie, it's been fantastic talking to you. I've really valued it. I should say this is my first time making an a bit lit whilst I'm traveling. I'm currently in a friend's flat, which is why I have a cuddly lobster off to my shoulder. I haven't mentioned that. So just in case anyone's wondering what's going on over there. Absolutely delightful to hear from you, and I've learned tons. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah.